All right, Ruth, thank you very much for the presentation. That was wonderful. I love the cartoon idea too. What a great way to distill a complicated world that you're in. Now, Adam, we heard about Ruth's journey at Heineken. Maybe you could share a little bit about EDF with us before we jump in.
Sure, yeah, happy to. And I'm probably going to share a little bit of an honest truth about EDF, so please don't tell my boss anybody, okay? So I've been at EDF for 3.5 years. I work in our corporate and customer supply chain team, and I head up a small team of governance and performance people. So we look after policies, processes, and indeed systems, including HICX. And we've had the pleasure of working with HICX for about 10 years. And we're about to do quite a lot of work with HICX on the system that we've been using for quite some time. I brought along a slide that kind of shows EDF in the UK. So this doesn't even get into group, doesn't even get into other countries that EDF are in. And the reason I've put this up here is because you'd be very jealous about this, but we have one ERP, and we have one language across the UK, which is even better. Yet we've still managed to make life very complicated for ourselves. Because we have, I forget how many I put on there, but probably about 7 different business units in EDF. And the reason why that's important is that each of those different business units is almost in a different industry. You've got the corporate and customers area that Nana and I sit in, and so customers is about billing, it's about marketing, it's about call centers and support for our customers. And then we've got the nuclear generation business, which is literally running nuclear power stations. Couldn't be more different. And then we've got the new nuclear business, which is currently building Hinkley Point C, and hopefully will be building Sizewell C. And although they're building a nuclear power station, they're a massive construction project. Again, totally different regulation, totally different processes, totally different industry that they work in. And then we've got renewables, which is about wind farms and solar. And so Eloise was talking about the difficulty of suppliers working with different companies. It's worse than that for us. If you want to work with different parts of EDF, you're working and onboarding 7 different business units just to work with EDF. Because each of our onboarding we do separately, because the requirements in the nuclear generation business are very different to the requirements in the customer's business. We ask different questions, we have different requirements, we have different standards. So for us, it's very complicated.
Yeah.
And so what we're looking to do, so as I say, we've been working with HICX for about 10 years. A lot of the content that we have in HICX is still from that early implementation. So we definitely need to lift the covers, look at what we have, and bring those up to date. The last couple of years, we've been sort of focused on other things. And whilst we weren't looking, HICX has developed a lot, new functionality and new ways of working and new features in the system. So we're going to wrap all that up, and in the new year, we're going to work with your professional services team, and we're going to do a dedicated project to basically bring us back up to where we need to be. So because of our different business units, it's difficult to do these things in a piecemeal fashion. So we're going to go away, we're going to almost build a new system. We have the benefit of having lots of the data that we've already got in the system, but we're going to give it a real facelift. And then once that's done, we can then launch that to the whole business. And hopefully, everyone will appreciate what we've done and have a new, shiny, very proactive system for us to work with our suppliers in.
Right, and so you mentioned onboarding. That's a key topic, and
Yeah.
Getting off to a good start with suppliers is absolutely foundational for their experience and the relationship you have with them. Can you expound a little bit more on the supplier experience part of it?
Yeah, so as I say, we kind of make life a little bit complicated, and one of the things we're going to look to combat is the duplication of that onboarding process. As I say, potentially as a supplier, if you're working for multiple parts of EDF, you're going to get asked the same questions. Sometimes different questions because they focus on different things, but very often the same questions. Eloise said, having that single repository of information is absolutely the right way to go, and something that we'll be looking to do in our project. Supplier onboarding is probably the bit that we do best at the moment. So we managed to gather that information. It's one of the few systems in EDF that is mandated right the way across all of the business. So we've cracked that, and we've got a solid platform that everybody uses, which is great. But what we don't do particularly well is once we have that data, we don't do very well at keeping it live, keeping it fresh. So we're also, in this project, we're going to be looking at how do we go beyond onboarding, and how do we make sure that that information we've gathered gets updated, gets corrected, gets refreshed by the suppliers as much as possible.
Thank you. And Ruth, we've talked about onboarding and engagement. There's a direct relationship between kind of engagement and the supplier experience. How do you look at that at Heineken?
Yeah, it's absolutely critical. It's that first contact after you've got through those tender processes. And actually, we have to remember, if you're onboarding a supplier into your systems, these are actually people you do want to work with. And actually, that's the first starting point. That's their first engagement with us as a business. So what we then are trying to do, we've got 7 different ways to onboard a supplier at the moment that come down to, in the best case, it only goes through 2 pairs of hands to onboard them into our central system. But in the worst case, we get into double digits. So we're now trying to get to that point. Once we've onboarded at the moment, we're not bad at keeping the supplier data clean, but the funnel that you've got to get to actually get them in first is really hard. And we recognize it's painful. And when somebody sort of says to me, and we're talking about it, and so say, look, when you check in for a flight, is it easier for you to put your own passport information in? Or is it faster for you to give your passport and all your pass information, your membership number, etc., to somebody else? It's so much faster just to do it yourself. So that ability to put the supplier information for supplier onboarding in the supplier's hands just becomes critical, and it becomes far more accurate.
Yeah, so we call that the kind of data experience flywheel.
Yeah.
You create a good experience for the supplier, they're more willing to give you better data, keep it up to date, which in turn makes their experience even better, and it just builds and builds. And that's the recipe. So, with that as the basis for where Heineken is today, where do you see building on that for the future? What's the vision?
The vision is supplier data, that their name, their address, their bank details. That's the first step basics. Mm-hmm. It's preschool. If we start looking forward, at one point in 2020, I had a moment of madness because I volunteered to look after our company carbon footprint reporting. Yeah, I've had better days. And my learning was, well, it's just about pulling the data to the right place. Yeah. But if you start to look, we are, as we said earlier on in this afternoon, everybody's asking all the same suppliers for the same data in a different way. So how do we start to, A, get to an industry coalition so that actually we agree what we do need to ask our suppliers, and then B, how do we simplify it so that suppliers can give us that data in the easiest possible way? Because if we get to that, hopefully we can then increase the frequency. Because at the moment, you're lucky if you can get a supplier carbon footprint updated every 12 months, probably 24, maybe 36. What happens if we'd like to go non-financial reporting the same way as financial and be able to almost close the carbon books every month? And you've got to really change the game plan and the conversation with suppliers to actually be able to move that needle. So huge ambitions to say, what can we capture in one place? And then how can we leverage it out into the different systems?
Yeah, I love the pragmatic viewpoint you're taking there, because it is a beast. So Adam, how do you determine if suppliers are truly engaged with you?
I normally look at whether or not they're keeping their details up to date. So, and by that I mean, so if you're an account manager at a supplier, so you're working with EDF and you're our interface with your supplier, and then that person decides they're going to have a career change and they're going to go off and they're going to go do something else. So the measure of how important EDF is, and therefore HICX is, because that's our sort of portal to bring the information in, for me, is in their handover to their successor, do they value the use of our system and working with EDF enough to pass that information on to their successor, and more importantly, update that information in our system? Because there's only so many things you can hand over, there's only so many sort of hours you spend with your successor. We have to be one of the topics in that discussion. If the system is valuable to them, if the system is giving them something back, then we'll be on that list. And then the details will be updated and we will get continuity from one to the other. If they're not getting value from our system and interacting with EDF, they're not going to list that on their to-do list. So that's my measure, is if we're constantly having to chase for updates for contact, then we're not providing the value to them. We're not as important as we should be and not featuring in that conversation.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So shift gears a little bit, talk about initiatives. I mean, I think probably every organization in here feels like they're overwhelmed with initiatives, right? And particularly, Adam, say in the energy sector, there's a lot that has to do with compliance.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe how do you stay on top of all the initiatives and actually try to winnow out the ones that don't matter as much?
I think the answer at the moment is not well enough. It's definitely going to be something that we focus on in this new project that we're going to do. We have lots of requirements across the different business units, and they're very different in different cases. And I think the honest answer is we don't have as much of that within the onboarding process as we need to. It happens, and they go off and they do it outside of the system, within their business unit, but we need to bring that into the center. We need to automate that, and we need that audit trail, and we need to capture that detail.
Got it. And then, Ruth, same question for you. How do you prioritize and make sure you're staying on top of all the different initiatives that are coming at you?
The good news, equally badly. I think, it's initiative overload. If you start to look at, we've got a carbon ambition out there, that means every supplier's generating information and initiatives back to us. We've got new product innovation generating initiatives. We've got simplification generating initiatives. You've got continuous improvement. And it all starts to snowball. So being able to prioritize it's really hard. Trying to get a value to match that you can actually justify and actually start allowing the business to take data-based informed decisions. And I think that's key and critical. And especially when it is a partnership with a supplier, you then double it because you have the challenge of two corporates both trying to justify the same initiative in their own company's language. And I think it's not only the initiative side, it's also if there is an incident. When you look at the ever-increasing cybersecurity risk, even down to the Log4j patch, people might remember that from nearly 2 years ago now. I had one supplier politely inform me that we'd told him 12 times that there was a Log4j patch. They were quite well informed because they were called Microsoft. But we'd had so many people in the business actually think I'm their key contact. We'd no mechanism to actually put the right channels in place to manage the communication, to manage the inputs, and it just becomes a challenging environment.
Thank you. Right, I think we have time now for some questions to be directed to Adam and Ruth. We'll use our fuzzy box. Go for it.
Well, a question to Beth, Ruth. Coming to the supplier onboarding, have you ever felt need to train your suppliers so that they are up to mark in providing you the right kind of information? What's your thoughts on that when you are trying to onboard a supplier? How you want to convince them that this is your requirement, this is your product requirement, this is the information you want to have? Do you do any workshop with them so that they can align with you to provide the right kind of information? That's my question.
So we're at pilot stage at the moment, so we're learning as we go. What we've tried to do is make it as simple as possible. So there's different tools you can get out there as well that can help suppliers. But one of my challenges, I'm very jealous of one business language. Because everybody can sit there and go, English, French, Spanish, Portuguese, Chinese. Yeah, okay, that doesn't get me Vietnam, which is one of my top 10 markets. So we're still learning in that space, but you've got to really simplify it down, and you've got to explain the rationale and the purpose for why it's this way, because you then sell the benefits of effectively doing this piece of work once opens up these 6 boxes and all of your future front doors versus multiple different logins.
Just a quick question around supply information and giving them the power to input their own information. Now, I know one of the challenges, as you said, cybersecurity or cyber risk is really on the rise. What are some of the processes or initiatives around managing the risk that comes with giving the supplier the power to put in their own information and also validating that information?
Yeah. So 2 probably separate areas. At any point when we're going through our tendering process with the supplier, we are asking upfront for certain cybersecurity details to try and maintain a standard. And that standard is at 2 levels, whether you're interacting directly in our network or if you're just effectively in a transactional relationship with us. Because if we've got somebody installing Wi-Fi based pieces of equipment that are going to transmit and receive information in our breweries, they have differential sort of security arrangements. So we try and sort of put a bubble around it during the tender process. And then as you start to sort of look at the different pieces, that data integrity is about all of the checks and balances you need to do as a business. So those checks don't change in terms of making sure we've got the right information from the right sources, the usual 4 eyes approach to things, so that you minimize that risk of fraud. But it's also one of the things we've also started to do as well is moving our tail spend out, so it's not transacting directly in our system. So our tail spend is now transacting through another mechanism, so that again, it just minimizes the overall business risk. We still keep the supplier's details, but again, you take another step away from your internal security systems and internal network. Let me pass to you for the first one on supplier management.
So Eloise called it out earlier. Really key to this is supplier segmentation. So we've changed that just this year. We've put a lot more science behind it, and we've got some series of questions that we ask on each of the suppliers of the supply chain team around, how easy is it to replace the supplier? What impact would the supplier's failure be? And so we take that, we've moved away from criticality score to importance score, because I think it's more reflective. And then we multiply that by spend to give us a total score. And then once you've got all of that data, then you can rank your suppliers on that score from top down, and then draw a line, because it's not even about they have to be over this score. It's about when you rank them, we still only have the capacity to really focus on 20 suppliers. So you draw a line at 20 suppliers wherever that comes. And then the next phase is the next 100 suppliers or whatever. So we're starting to do that, and actually that's going to really pay dividends for us, because for supplier management, for supplier information management, we will have a better focus on those top-tier suppliers where we need that top-tier supplier focus.
Okay, I've been given the sign that time is up. Let's give a big hand to Adam and Ruth. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Tilly.
Yep, thank you.
Thanks very much.